Welcome to episode 007.
Hey, that sounds a lot like 007.
We also take a look at the extensive restored collection at the Western Railway Museum.
And don't throw your mine motor down the vertical shaft.
This is Railroad Showcase.
So now we're returning for our second installment of our visit to the Western Railway Museum. This facility has one of the most complete collections of electric equipment on the West Coast.
Our first car that we're here looking at today is San Francisco Municipal Railway number 178. This car was built in 1923 by Bethlehem Shipbuilding's facility that they had in San Francisco. They had a facility in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but it was their San Francisco facility that built this car. And this car ran in San Francisco from 1923 until 1958. At which time our organization purchased the car. And before we purchased the property here at Rio Vista Junction in 1960, this car was in Yuba City in Marysville doing fan trips on the Sacramento Northern, and it did that up until the early 60s. And this car also in 1982 had a repatriation in San Francisco during the great trolley festivals of 1982 and 1983. And now it is one of our main cars for service here at the museum, and it runs most weekends, so whenever anyone comes out to visit, they get a good chance that they can ride this car. So this car we're at here now is East Bay Street Railways number 352. East Bay Street Railways was a predecessor to Key System. And this car is in the cat whisker paint, which is a bluish teal with some beige, and they call it cat whisker because of the design here on the front of the car. And this car was built in 1911 by the American Car Company of St. Louis. You wouldn't know it, but this is an all-wooden car. You wouldn't think that because of the steel sheathing they have over the wood. Key System did this in the 1930s to modernize their equipment, to make it look better, to make it more enticing as the streetcar system stuff was winding down. And so this car, when it was originally built, had a clear story roof and had complete wood paneling all the way down the side. So this car right here is the Petaluma and Santa Rosa Railroad number 63. This car is what's known as a combine. If you can see there, there's a passenger section, and in the back there is a baggage section. This car was built in 1904 by the American Car Company of St. Louis and ran on the Petaluma and Santa Rosa Railroad. Passenger service ended in 1932, and all the original metal and metal hardware under the car, like the trucks and motors and everything, was scrapped. The car body became a summer cabin up by Lake Berryessa, and in the late 1960s, the body came here to Rio Vista and was fully restored, and the car started operating in the mid-1970s and has been one of our main operational cars here at the museum ever since. This car is a 600-volt car. This car has 4 600-volt motors under it. We have some cars here that can run on 1200 or 1500 volts on our 600-volt system. They are just slower. This is one of the fastest cars out of all of our older wooden cars because of the 4 600-volt motors, and it really has some get up and go to it. Coming up next is Portland Traction 4001, and this car was built by the Coleman Car Company in 1926, and it was originally for the Indiana Railroad. When the Indiana Railroad got rid of their cars, they became streetcars in Terre Haute before going to Portland Traction Company. This car came to us as a gift for us leasing our Key System 987 car to Portland Traction back in the late 1950s when they were short of cars. Its restoration was finished in 2015 for Members Day, and it is restored to its original Portland Traction livery, and then after that they became cream and red toward the end. And this car is capable of doing up to about 30 miles an hour. It usually sees service every other week or so, depending on what operator likes to take it out, and it's a lot of people's personal favorite. This is the last of all of the key system bridge units that were built. This one was built by St. Louis Car Company in 1937, and it ran on the key system from 1937 until 1958. 187 was originally owned by the Pacific Coast Chapter Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, and we acquired it from them as a gift in 1988. The car is painted in its orange and silver pre-war appearance. So the key system bridge unit, as you can see, is one of the larger interurban cars. It's what you call an articulated car, meaning that there is a center joint that pivots. If you can see there toward the center of the car, you can see the truck where the articulation happens. And these cars were underpowered, especially on the approach up to the Bay Bridge. The articulation truck is not powered because these were big, heavy cars and it was quite a substantial grade going up to the Bay Bridge. They had their struggles. Coming up next is the newest car in our collection. This is San Diego Metropolitan Transit Services 1018. This car was built in 1981 by Siemens Duval in Germany, and this car represents the beginning of the LRV modernization movement in America. San Diego was the first city to really start with this concept and this idea, and these cars were at the forefront of that. The 1018 is the best representation that we have of an early LRV car that is in service at this point. This is Sacramento Northern number 1005, on point of our Sacramento Northern interurban train, recreating a classic scene that you would have seen on the Sacramento Northern in the 1930s. This car was built in 1912 by the Holman Car Company of San Francisco, is capable of running on 600, 1200, and 1500 volts. This car was originally built for the predecessor of the Sacramento Northern, the Oakland, Antioch, and Eastern. Then it became part of the San Francisco-Sacramento Railroad, which later became the Sacramento Northern subsidiary of the Western Pacific. Our organization acquired this car in 1951 after it became a key system service car. And we repainted it back to Sacramento Northern colors and used it on fan trips everywhere, all over the Bay Area in the 50s and 60s. The locomotive is Visalia Electric number 502. It is a 1946 GE 44-ton diesel locomotive, which ran on the Visalia Electric, which of course ran out of Visalia, California. And it is painted in its as-delivered Southern Pacific Tiger Stripe paint. We acquired this locomotive in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and in the mid-1970s, we repainted it from its scarlet and gray paint that it had on the Visalia Electric into its as-delivered Tiger Stripe paint. Currently, this locomotive is the only operating diesel at the museum. Behind it is Salt Lake in Utah parlor observation car number 751. This car was built by the Niles Car Company of Cincinnati, Ohio, and worked for the Salt Lake and Utah Railroad, which ran out of Salt Lake City. And it was retired in 1947, and our organization acquired it in the early 1950s. This car is the regular parlor car on our Scenic Limited trains that we run every April. We have now made our way into the restoration shop here at the museum to talk to you a little bit more about some more cars on the property. And this is probably the most important car on our entire property, because if it weren't for this car, none of this would be here today. This car is key system number 271, and this was the first car that our organization purchased in 1946. This car was originally built in 1901 for Lehigh Valley Transit, and then went to the key system shortly after Lehigh Valley got the car. They were almost new. And this car was in service on the quay until 1946. These were cars that were really carrying a lot of people during the war when rationing was really high. The transit systems had to use anything they could get their hands on to keep moving the public around, and so this car was part of that. This car has been in the restoration shop now for the last 3 years. We are doing a complete ground-up restoration on the car. We have rebuilt both ends, which is why you are seeing this in primer here. And then up on the clear story, we're doing roof work. Top speed is about 55 or 60 miles an hour because we put higher horsepower motors on the car in the 50s. Our organization actually went to the key shops in Emeryville, and we put higher horsepower motors on the cars from the 600 series class cars that predated the key system bridge unit that you saw earlier. There were some that were surplus, and they put that under this car. So you look at it and you think, little street car that putts along, and you realize it keeps wanting to go faster. So this car wants to move. This is the woodworking area of our restoration shop. This is where all our carpenters come and do woodwork on the car. Our restoration facility here, the building, the concrete pad, I should say, was erected in 1976. And the shop was finished in the mid to late 1970s, and it's been our main work area ever since. This woodworking area has been here, designated, and everything you could need for carpentry is over here. And our metalworking section has a lot of tools, railroad tools, drill presses, lathes, and all of that came out of the Western Pacific Jeffrey shops in Sacramento. To show you the idea for railroad rebuilding and to show you how much, different sort of parts we need, because this equipment is exotic. It's not your normal everyday Chevy. You can't just go to the auto parts store to get any of this equipment. Just rivets alone. All different shapes and sizes, given any type of job we want. And, try going to Ace Hardware. Try finding some of these here. We hoard things like treasure. This is Sacramento Northern number 654. And this is the locomotive that brought down the curtain to electrification on the Sacramento Northern. This is what you call a steeple cab locomotive, and this was built by General Electric in 1930. And this car worked in freight service on the Sacramento Northern until the final day of electrification on April 10th of 1965. Our organization acquired the locomotive shortly after that, and it's always been one of our main operating pieces of equipment here at the museum. And it's been a personal favorite of a lot of people because most people who are still alive today who remember the Sacramento Northern as an electrified railroad remember these guys. Its sisters, which are 653 and 652, both survive. We also have the 652, and the 653 is down at the Orange Empire Railway Museum. What you are looking at now is a lot of the transit organizations' answers to cutting costs, but still providing streetcar service. This is what's called a Bernie safety car, and this car was built in 1920, originally for the San Diego Electric, and it later came to the Sacramento Northern. This is car number 62, and we acquired this car in 1948. And currently, we are rebuilding it. We have outsourced the truck, and the truck's back here. You can see the truck is right in front of you here, and it's a single truck car. This truck shows you a good example of why the Bernie car was very unpopular. This truck would sit right in the center, so there was a lot of overhang on both ends with only 4 wheels. They would bounce a lot. They caused a really uncomfortable, rough ride, especially with the hard seats in the car.
The museum has 2 PCC cars. Muni, number 1016, is in good operating condition. It was delivered new to San Francisco in 1951 and ran into the early 70s. On Members' Day each year, those who have paid their annual membership fee to the museum can participate in the Run a Trolley program and try their hand at operating this classic car. Norfolk Southern has just announced their strategic plan for 2019. On their website, the company listed several points on their goals, such as striving for a 5% increase in revenue through 2021 and achieving a 60% operating ratio by then as well. This isn't necessarily good for all, though. WVVA reports that during the company's investor conference on Monday, it shared that this plan calls for the elimination of 500 employees by the end of this year and 3,000 more by 2021. They also expect to be able to cut at least 500 engines from the roster. President and CEO James Squires was quoted as saying, "The success of our customers, our employees, and our company will ensure the success of our shareholders."
Nickel Plate Berkshire number 757 has a new home. Last week, it was moved from the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania to the Mad River and Nickel Plate Railroad Museum in Bellevue, Ohio. This S2 Series Lima engine was built in 1944 and was retired at the age of 14 in 1958. Originally, the railroad intended to donate 757 to Bellevue in 1960, but the town failed to make the necessary preparations, so the engine was donated to Pennsylvania in 1966. Fast forward 50 years, and plans began in 2017 to move it back to Bellevue, and sufficient funds were finally raised. The Virtual Railfan YouTube channel caught the engine as it ran through Horseshoe Curve on its 400-mile trip westward. Plans are for a cosmetic restoration and for a permanent shelter at its new home.
On February 5th, workers in a gold mine in the Chelyabinsk region of Russia got a surprise as an electric engine had a short circuit, rolling it forward into an empty elevator shaft. As we see from the security recordings, the engine fell several levels before stopping, causing much damage. Fortunately, none of the workers were hurt. However, the engine will likely require major surgery.
CSX has settled with the family of Sarah Jones, who was killed when a movie director instructed the film crew to shoot illegally on a railroad bridge near Jessup, Georgia in 2014. CSX told them in writing twice that they didn't have permission to shoot on the bridge. The production company was making the never-released film Midnight Rider about singer Greg Allman. The family filed suit against the movie makers, CSX, and the owners of a nearby pulp mill. In 2017, a jury decided that CSX was 35% responsible for the incident and would thus owe $3.9 million. CSX appealed. Director Randall Miller made a plea deal and served 1 year of a 2-year sentence in prison for involuntary manslaughter and criminal trespass. A number of news sources reported that CSX would now be paying the full $3.9 million. Other news sources were more clear when they indicated that the amount of the undisclosed settlement was not known.
That really was tragic.
You know, and it was so unnecessary. I mean, now, of course, the keyboard warriors on the internet just exploded after that news item came out. And, you know, I agree that the railroad wasn't really at fault. If the film crew hadn't been given express permission to be there with the times that they were allowed on the trestle and all of that, then they simply shouldn't have been there. And I really feel for the engineer who's coming up on this scene, and he has to decide, does he throw it into emergency as soon as he sees people? I mean, that can be a dangerous procedure in and of itself, and there's people next to the tracks all the time. When he gets a little bit closer, evidently he did make a brake application, but of course by that time there was no stopping the train.
Yeah. Well, and it seems that most everyone, if not everyone, was off the tracks, but they couldn't get the gurney off the rails. And when the train hit that, it seems like that caused the biggest issue.
Right. And, you know, to my thinking, whoever made the decision to go out on that trestle knowing that they did not have express permission from the railroad, that's the person who was at fault.
Something else that, in my opinion, was completely inappropriate was the lack of sympathy that some people were showing in response to this. No one deserves to die because they were listening to the orders of their boss.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem like she was the culpable one.
Right.
You know, the blame for this should not be laid at her feet. And what a tragic loss. But you know, something that I did like that came out of this was there was a grassroots campaign among film crews in Hollywood, all over the United States, all over the world, as a matter of fact. And they called it Slates for Sarah, and they had slogans like "Safety for Sarah" or "Safety on Set," "Spirit of Sarah," and they, in these PSAs, there were crews that were putting stickers with her name and thoughts of sympathy and remembrance on their slates. So, no matter what you're doing, safety is a serious concern. You know, when I was a young man, I used to blow off safety concerns. You know, if you're tough enough, you can make it happen. But a lot of us rail fans are basically a film crew of one, and we're spending all of our time at trackside. These things can happen in a split second. It just isn't worth putting yourself in danger to get that one shot.
Absolutely. And it's always, again, it's horrible when something like this happens, but if there's anything good that can come out of it, such as public awareness of the dangers and the safety measures that need to be taken, then that should absolutely be made known.
Be safe out there, everybody. So this week, we've got another movie review. Since this is our 7th episode, we thought it would be appropriate to do a 007 movie. So we're going to take a look at Skyfall, which was the 25th Bond movie that came out in 2015. And this movie has what has to be the best Bond train scene that was ever filmed. I mean, we loved this scene, didn't we?
100%.
But we're going to tear it apart, aren't we?
100%.
So we're going to start out with a few of the things that we didn't like about the scene. And I know this is really minor, but for me, one of the things I didn't like was, what is it with the action guys that get angry and have to throw away a perfectly good gun just because it's run out of ammunition?
Dramatic effect. So one of the things that stood out to me right away was the strange consist of this train. It's a passenger train that for some reason has construction equipment and 5 brand new VW Bugs.
So yes, that is a pretty odd combination. I mean, mixed consist trains used to be a lot more common, but construction equipment on the same flat car with brand new cars.
Yeah.
Another thing that I just could not see as believable was the fact that he was able to uncouple the train with a small caliber handgun. I mean, give me a break.
And what about the glad hands? Weren't they supposed to come apart at the coupling, not at a random point along the hose? Also, why didn't the train stop? First, they uncoupled 2 cars, 3 cars, and then an excavator ripped the back of the last passenger car off. How did nobody notice that and think, I need to stop this train?
Right, and when it came apart, why didn't the whole train just go into emergency?
It never fails that just when someone needs something in a movie, they could find it conveniently lying around within reach. Where on any train is there going to be a just 3-foot length of chain on top of a car?
Loose.
That he could just grab
and start using to fight. The final negative point that struck me about this was how quickly she gets ahead of the train. Towards the end of the scene, she's running along even with the train. And then she has to divert. The road goes off to the side, goes the long way around the mountain. She has to cross a deep canyon, get up onto the other side, park her vehicle, get out, get her rifle ready, and she has time to have a long conversation with M while the train is just now catching up to her. I mean, how does that happen?
Time warp.
Okay, so enough picking the scene apart. There were some things that we liked about it, an awful lot.
There was a train in it.
We liked the fact that there was a train in it.
So it's kind of a small thing, but I liked that they didn't have this train running at breakneck speeds. Oftentimes, so many movies are all about the speed, and the action scene is based off of the speed. And whenever there's a train, it seems like it's instantly going 100 miles an hour around the curves. This train was running at a believable and realistic track speed.
I love the part where he jumps down into the passenger car that has just been opened up like a sardine can, and M gets on the radio with him and asks him what's going on, and he just says,
"Just changing carriages."
One of my favorite parts about this whole thing is right at the beginning, and it's how he gets on the train. I mean, it's right on the edge of believability, the way he launches himself off of that motorcycle onto the train. But it was so good because they didn't make him seem superhuman. No, they shot it like he was a guy who was just barely accomplishing what he was trying to do.
Yeah. Well, didn't you ride when you were younger, Dad? Wasn't that how you got off motorcycles?
Every time.
So even though I take issue with the consist, it's not common anymore. I did like the idea of holding the train together with the excavator just punching through the roof of the passenger car.
It was awesome. What a cool idea. Overall, the thing that I appreciated the most in this scene was the simple fact that they decided to actually film it on top of a real train. They had Daniel Craig standing on top of a moving train, cabled down for safety, but he was up there in the wind shooting these scenes, and that added so much to its believability. A lot of other filmmakers would have just taken his actors and stood them on top of a table in a green screen studio and painted in everything else with CGI, and that takes away so much, in my opinion.
It really adds a lot. It gives it that feel that this is reality, not just an action movie.
So, overall, this train scene in this movie, we liked it?
Very much.
I liked it. So, 2 thumbs up. That's 3 thumbs.
Next week, we're going to take a look at California's high-speed rail. Is it visionary? Is it a complete boondoggle? Both the president and the governor of California have brandished their Twitter swords.
Thanks for watching. We appreciate you joining us for the ride. Keep your hand on the throttle and your eye on the rail.